at 11,500 feet. We are about 5 miles south of the Pennsylvania-Maryland border. We have Brandon here, and we're going to Elmira, New York. Now, Brandon is a Navy veteran, spent 14 years in the Navy. That was from 2000 to 2014, correct?
Correct.
And what did you do in the Navy?
I was a logistics specialist.
My name is Royce Repka. I attend Branch Creek campus of LCBC, and I'm a flight instructor. I have several family members that were in the military. My dad was in the Air Force. My grandfather was in the Navy during World War II. So it's always been something that I've thought of and considered. When 9/11 happened, it just struck something in my soul where I knew that joining the military was something I needed to do. So I joined the Army, and I spent 6 years in the military. When I came to LCBC, we were in the Remarkable series, and then I attended GLS. And one of the speakers was Liz Bohannon, who talked about beginner's pluck. And she has a nonprofit that helps underprivileged women in Africa. And it really just made me kind of think, like, I have these talents, I have these skills, I have this desire to do something. How can I combine that, and what is there? Being a military veteran and respecting everything that veterans do, as well as being a pilot, I realized if I put these together, then I can have flights of gratitude. And I can help veterans get to medical appointments that are too far to drive and too costly for them to find the transportation. Flights of Gratitude is my way of giving back to veterans and alleviating a problem that they don't need to deal with. We're taking the headache of transportation out of the equation for them, for whatever they're dealing with. It's just incredibly fulfilling, and I'm just so proud to be able to use the talents that God has given me in this way. We're always looking for more veterans who could benefit from our services. So they can find us online and send us an email, and we'd love to help more veterans.
We really appreciate your service. We appreciate the courage of you stepping up, getting your the help that you need, and you know, we're happy to help. It is really our pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Man, how amazing is it to see veterans serving veterans and continuing the legacy of putting others first for the good of the world. Man, one of my favorite traditions around LCBC is we love taking a moment to pause in our gatherings and to simply say thank you. So as a church, we love the value of putting others first, and vets, you put that on display, and we would love to invite everyone who has served or is serving to stand up at your seats across all of our campuses. And so we're not gonna ask you to come up front, we're not gonna ask you to dance, we're not gonna ask you to say anything. All we wanna do is take a moment to say thank you to you. So right now, vets, in your seats, stand up across all of our campuses. Stand on up. If you're watching online, stand up. Man, give it up for all of our past and present servicemen. Guys, seriously, thank you for giving us the gift to be able to say thank you to you. I'd love to take a moment and just pray for each and every one of you guys across all of our campuses. Jesus, thank you for these incredible men and women. Thank you for these incredible men and women who continue the legacy of putting others first, who sign up and show up to meet the needs in our world and some of the darkest places of our world. And so, God, I just pray that right now, that they know deep in their hearts how appreciated and loved they are. I pray that as they continue to go through the process of healing, that you help them find healing, you help them find peace, you help them find that brotherhood and community. I pray that you will bless them. For those who are currently in the process of transitioning out of the service back into civilian life, I just pray that you will guide them, that you'll help them find where they land and where they can find that community once again. I pray that you lead them to where they can continue to lead and influence in this next season of life. And God, we also want to take a moment just to say thank you to all the wives and the husbands and the moms and the dads and the brothers and the sisters and the kids and the friends who stayed behind and stood beside them. I pray that you continue to help them reconnect, that you continue to bring them peace, that you continue to let the families be strong and whole. And God, we also just want to take a moment to pray for each of our active duty men and women right now who are continuing to put themselves in harm's way for the good of our communities, that you will protect them, that you will hold them, that you'll hold their families back at home. and that we'll see you move through them in incredible ways. Jesus, thank you for these men and women. Thank you for their legacy of putting others first. And thank you for giving us a moment to be able to have the freedom to even be able to say thank you to them. Jesus, we love you. We thank you and we trust you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Seriously, on behalf of LCBC and our communities and our family, thank you for choosing to put others first. Thank you for your service. We love you guys, and thanks for being here today with us. Man, what an incredible example of what this series is truly all about. Last week, we started a new series called Active Love, where we're talking about how do we have a love that actually shows up for others, that does more than simply talk about helping others, but that flexes its muscles and shows up in a big way. And last week, I just got to brag on you guys. You started flexing and you started showing up in big ways. And last week, we were challenged to activate our love and to show up in our communities by simply pulling out our wallets and giving. Giving to organizations in each of our neighborhoods that are doing some pretty amazing work already, but with just a little financial boost could be doing even more amazing work. And last week we started collecting money, and it's not too late to jump in. And we are thrilled to be able to start writing checks here soon. Checks that say our church is behind you, we are standing with you, and we love what you're doing, so keep serving and loving in our communities the way that you do. Guys, I desperately want our church to be known as a church that shows up in our neighborhoods and our towns, who are known for running towards the needs among us. But I also want us to be a church that not only sees what's going on here in our backyard, but who has the eyes to see what's going on around the world, who remembers deeply Jesus' final challenge to each of us was to go unto all the world. That for us, that we were to be his final witnesses, his witnesses everywhere, and that when Jesus said, you will be my witnesses, telling people about me everywhere, in Jerusalem, in Judea, and Samaria, and to the ends of the world, that we listen, and that we as a church go everywhere. That we go from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria to the ends of the earth, and that we follow Jesus' last words where he was pushing us to remember to not care only for those close to us, like us, near us, but to push our gaze beyond us, beyond our towns and beyond what's happening just in our neighborhoods, to see the bigger picture of what's happening in our state and in our country and in our world. I think Jesus knew that each of us, we're all kind of homebodies. We all naturally become a little bit more self-occupied and inwardly focused. And Jesus knew that this inward, us-word slide is in all of us. It's natural. And so he warns us. In fact, he actually commands us to fight against it and to continually look beyond our four walls and to not miss the big picture of what's happening in the world. But sometimes, seeing the bigger picture, seeing what's happening around the world, well, if we're honest, that just hurts. It's uncomfortable. And we don't always like to see the things that we see. We don't want to see their reality. We don't want to see their pain, their struggle. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to have to wrestle with my privilege and my excess and how small my problems are compared to the problems that they're facing. But Jesus tells us, he tells us we have to look. We have to know. We have to see. And some things, once you see them, you simply can't unsee them. Some things you can't unsee. And for me growing up, I'd heard stories of poverty, I'd seen pictures, but it wasn't until I was holding on to the back of a moped riding into the hills of Thailand that I realized just how ignorant I was. See, at this moment I was 16 years old and I just got my driver's license and had this awesome gold Volkswagen Beetle with big old speakers and a little hula girl in the back, and I was loving life and I was caring way more about myself than I would ever want to admit. And somehow or another, I got invited to go on this team to Thailand to be a part of a group who would provide childcare for this missionary conference on that side of the globe. Now, a missionary is anyone who goes from here to there to show love and care. And I knew that those missionaries, they were there to love and care, but I was going for the Thai resort. I was going to ride an elephant. I wasn't going with the most pure motives. I was going for the pictures and the stories and the food and the swag. And if Instagram was a thing, I would have blown your phone up. But all I had was a 24-shot disposable camera. And if for those of you who are old enough, you know that click, 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 and then you line it up and you're like, snap. Then you got to charge the battery, and you charge the battery, and you charge the battery, then it's like click, 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 snap. Well, we get to Thailand, and like any wise 16-year-old would do, I instantly befriended the most important person in this resort, which was the chef. And the chef and I became good friends, and I butchered his Thai name so bad that he begged me to just simply call him Peter. So Peter and I became great friends, and every morning Peter would have my favorite omelet waiting for me, and he would have chocolate toast, and in the evenings he would have milkshakes for me, and Peter and I spent a lot of time together. And by the end of the week, Peter decided that he was gonna invite me and my best friend Joel to actually go on a moped ride with him. Now, quick time out. I have no clue what compelled me to jump on the back of a stranger's moped in a foreign country and to say, let's go for a joyride through the mountains. But in hindsight, it was one of the best choices I ever made. So Joel and I, we met Peter on a Saturday morning, and Peter and his friends, they were about 5'1" with their dress shoes on, and Joel and I are both over 6 feet. So we jumped on the back of these tiny mopeds and literally had to like wrap our legs around them. And guys, it was like a scene from Dumb and Dumber as we drove off into the mountainside with us just wrapping around these little Thai guys. Well, we rode these mopeds, and we rode these mopeds to one of the most pivotal points in my life. See, you can't unsee some of the things you see. And Peter, he had a surprise for Joel and I. We rode these mopeds to the top of the hill, top of the mountain, and then he turned off onto this dirt path. And we started following this dirt trail into the jungle, and we traveled an hour or so back into the jungle, and we would often have to stop and pick up the mopeds to cross over streams or rivers or push them up mud banks. And we rode and carried those mopeds for what felt like an hour or so way back into the jungle. And then all of a sudden, just in the middle of the jungle, we pop up into this village that was broken down huts and dirt floors and bamboo walls. And this village that had like half-naked kids running around, and all the adults looked like old weathered baseball gloves that had been left outside for one too many rainstorms. And my jaw just dropped as for the first time I stepped into true poverty, like living on less than $1 a day type poverty. And everyone in the village, they instantly started coming out, and they started staring at us, and they started touching our skin and wanting to feel our hair. And every time they looked at us, it was like they were looking deep inside of us. And all the kids, they wanted to get photos of us. And so Joel and I, we jumped down and started taking photos with all these kids. And Peter leans over as all these kids are coming over, and he goes, hey, you might be the first white person they've ever seen. In fact, you may be the first white person this village has ever seen, or that has seen this village. And then he said, hey, welcome to such and such refugee camp. And I wish I could tell you the name of the camp, and I wish I could tell you where the people were fleeing from, but all I could remember was I was in shock, and I was flooded with emotions, and I was trying to take it all in. And Peter kept talking, but all I remember thinking about was, how is this camp with this poverty and these needs just a mountaintop from that resort with all the excess and the omelets and the chocolate toast? And actually, how is this camp just a plane ride from my home and my Volkswagen and my everything? How does this place and my place coexist on the same planet at the same time in history? And guys, sometimes you just can't unsee what you've seen. And if I'm honest, my natural response was to simply stop looking, just to turn my head to never look into one of these kids' eyes and to not want to hear their stories, because I kind of just didn't want to know. I didn't want to have to reconcile their reality. I enjoyed my blissful ignorance. But you can't unsee what you've seen, and this moped ride wrecked me. And it just kind of like tattooed itself on a part of my soul. And I swore, riding out of the mountain that day, that I would never forget. But you guys know life. I did. And I remember getting reabsorbed back into my little world and my Beetle and my girlfriend and my high school drama and my sports. But every now and then that village and those kids and that dirt floor and the 6-year-old little girl pushing this giant millstone around to grind grain, they would just frequently like sneak out of nowhere. And they'd pop back into my mind. And when they did, I would have to hold those memories in one hand and my current pampered life in the other. And I wish I could say that that made me different and it made me live a different type of life, that it changed me. But honestly, all it did was it convicted me and it made me feel embarrassed and it made me feel guilty for all that I had with how little they had. And I found myself being haunted by this question of how do I live here when that's how they live there? How do I live here knowing that's how they live there? And for a short season, I was convinced that I needed to become a missionary, and I needed to go from here to there to help and care. That going and moving would be the best response to what I had seen. And so that was kind of what I was thinking. And then I stumbled into my first foreign language class. And I don't really know the appropriate way to say this, but that was an utter train wreck, folks. I mean, like, I can barely speak American, much less proper English. And to try to learn a second language, that was just going to have to be like an act of God. But guys, the only miracle that I received, it wasn't learning a new language. It was actually getting a brand new teacher who was super gullible. And guys, I baked brownies to pass my final exam out of Spanish. It was awful, guys. Like, I passed Spanish with brownies. I don't know how that happened. But what I discovered in that whole experience was that being a missionary and having to speak a different language, that was not going to be in my future. But I still couldn't shake. How do we live here knowing that's how they live there? How do we live here knowing that's how they live there? Well, life kept moving forward. Doors open, doors closed, and eventually I found myself working here at LCBC. And for this short season, I actually found myself working not just for anyone here at LCBC, but I found myself working for Brad Still. And if you know Brad Still, he was a former missionary who turned our global initiatives director for our entire church, and then he turned into our Lancaster City campus pastor. And I got to do student ministry at the Lancaster City for a season, and man, I loved working with Brad, and I loved being at that campus. And what I loved most in that whole season was I got to sit with Brad each and every week for our one-on-ones, and I just got to learn from him, and I got to pick his brain, and I got to ask him questions. And one of the things that I loved learning from him was wrestling, how do we live here knowing that's how they live there? And God used Brad to expand my thinking in profound ways. I mean, Brad and I, we talked about like mission tourism and the harm that it causes. We talked about how the cost is anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000 to send a team just of 10 people to do the work in a village, that same amount of money would actually provide the salary for multiple workers in that village for years, and those workers would actually do better work than we were sending a team to do. And so we just talked about how mission tourism kind of just takes things from the community. We also talked about the damage that rich Americans do, thinking that we know what's best, and we kind of like swoop in, and we actually end up doing more damage than good. And so we read books like Toxic Charity and When Helping Hurts, and we had to process stories about where, these rich Americans, they would send shiploads of rice to these different regions, thinking that they were helping, but they'd accidentally flood the region with rice that would then drive down the local food costs. Well, the food costs would drive down so low, the farmers couldn't compete, and then next thing you know, the farmers are going out of business, and then the day comes, the ships are out of rice, but the farmers are also out of business, and we leave the country worse than when we found it. We talked about so much, and I learned so much, but now Brad haunted me with two questions. I was haunted with how do I live here knowing that's how they live there, but also how do I help without messing it up more? Like, how do I help without not causing more harm? And what I realized was that we're in a serious catch-22 here. I mean, on one hand, we have to respond. We have to respond not only to kids living in dirt floors in Africa, in Thailand, but we have to respond to the fact that 700 kids today died. 700 kids under the age of 5 die daily because of unclean water. 700 kids today died because of unclean water. I mean, we have to respond that roughly every year, 50,000 humans are sold into slavery. Every year, 50,000 humans are sold into slavery. Many of those humans sold by their father because their father think they would have a better life as a slave than starving to death in their home. We have to respond to the millions of widows who are caring for kids without their fathers because their fathers were forced to fight in a civil war that the father could care less about. He was just simply the pawn of an evil man's schemes, and he knew that if he didn't fight, his home would be burned and his kids would be hurt. And so he had to fight to protect his home. And now this widow has to care for her kids. We have to respond that roughly 689 million people live in what's called extreme poverty. That's 689 million people living on less than $1.90 a day. To put that in perspective, that's 1 out of 10 humans on the planet live on less than $2 a day. We have to respond. We have to respond to the fact that there are babies every week that are dying simply because their mothers didn't get access to basic health care. We have so many numbers like this. But you get the point. We have to respond, but we simply can't ignore this. So seriously, how do we live here knowing that's how so many live there? But how do we help without messing it up more? And if you're listening today and you're not a follower of Jesus, first of all, I'm so glad that you're here. Seriously, welcome. But you're not off the hook. You still have to respond. This isn't just a Christian thing. It's actually a humanity thing. But if you're here and you are a Christian, you are a follower of Jesus, then this is a mandate. This is a command. I mean, Jesus doesn't mess around when it comes to this stuff because he knows that our heart, the soul of our faith, is at stake if we ignore this. I mean, if you're someone who claims to follow Jesus, but you don't respond somehow to the needs of our world, it's like saying you love your dog but never feeding it. Something's just not clicking. The dots aren't connecting. Like Jesus was super clear on his intentions for us. And I mean, just listen to some of the things that were said. I mean, in Galatians, you got to share with each other your burdens. And in this way, obey the law of Christ. And we got in Hebrews, he says, don't forget about doing good. Share with those in need. These are the sacrifices that please God. In John, we read, it is my commandment, love each other in the same way that I have loved you. In Philippians, we read, don't look out for your own interests, but look out for the interests of others. And in Luke, we hear, if you have 2 shirts, give 1 to the poor. If you have food, share with those who are hungry. And then in Matthew, Jesus says, I tell you the truth, when you refuse to help the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you're refusing me. And then this one in 1 John, he says, if someone has enough money to live well and sees a brother and sister in need and shows no compassion, how can God's love be in that person? Holy gut punch, people. Jesus wasn't joking when he told us to go and be his hands and feet, to go unto all the world, not just to the convenient parts of the world, not just to our neighbors who look like and talk like and act like us, to go unto all the world. So how do we live here knowing that's how they live there? But also, how do we go there and not screw it up? Those 2 questions, if you seriously think about them, will haunt you and drive you crazy. But guys, I'm here today to give you some really, really amazing news. News that that has given me so much hope. And it's the news to discover that there's actually an answer to this, like a really, really good answer, a shockingly simple answer. It's like the best answer that we as LCBC have discovered, but it's also the best answer that like national, global NGOs and humanitarians around the world are finding out. And like the whole global community are saying this is the best way to respond. And they're saying that this response is actually a globally focused that refuses us to become self-absorbed. They said this response is something that helps and it doesn't hurt. They're saying that this response actually has lasting change. And the response that we've discovered that we believe deeply in here, that, it is deep in my bones that I believe in, is child sponsorship. Like a couple of 20s a month, adopt a child, become pen pals, write a letter, child sponsorship. And I get it, guys. You might be sitting there like I was once sitting there. I was super skeptical about child sponsorship. I didn't trust that it just wasn't another slick way to emotionally move me to give up my money each month. I wasn't convinced that only a few bucks a month could actually make a difference. I wasn't convinced that the kids were even real, and I wasn't convinced that the money was even making it to them. I was skeptical. Surely these global problems that we're seeing is too big, too much for a simple child sponsorship to make any sort of difference. But 9 years ago, Brad and I are talking, and he invited me to go on a trip that would change my life. And but what changed me this time was as I was going over another insane mountaintop, not on the back of a moped hanging onto a tiny tie man, but this time in the back of an SUV. that was headed to a community that our Lancaster City campus was sponsoring kids in. It's a community deep in the mountains of the Bella-Vue-la-Montagne mountains of Haiti, which is about three hours outside of Port-au-Prince. We're in the back of this moped, but by this time, as I'm sitting in the back of this SUV, I'm not an innocent 16-year-old anymore. I mean, I had been to the killing fields of Cambodia and walked over bones eroding out of the soil and sat with the National History Director as he's trying to figure out how he tells the history of the Khmer Rouge. I had stood at the gates of Auschwitz, the notorious World War II concentration camp, and had to wrestle with what had happened in Poland. I'd been in the law offices of Phnom Penh the morning after girls were rescued from a sex brothel. I had been to Mexico and Vietnam. I'd seen poverty. I'd seen evil up close. I was not ignorant or innocent anymore. I was super skeptical. And I had seen response done horribly wrong. I remember watching some missionaries that were so manipulative. They manipulated people, and it was chaotic, and it was degrading, and they took their humanity and they created dependency. It was like the worst response I could ever see before my eyes. So that day, 9 years ago, I rode on the back of this SUV over the mountaintops, and I was ready to rip them to shreds, to prove yet again they were just a corrupt organization looking to emotionally milk Americans out of their money for their profit. And guys, I was so skeptical. I was so jaded. But God used that to drive me to ask questions that I normally wouldn't. He forced me to see things in a way that I normally couldn't. Like one of my first questions, as we're driving over these mountains in a tactical four-wheel drive SUV that could barely handle the terrain, and we're bouncing all over the place. I remember looking at our host and I said, why are we not in Port-au-Prince? Like, they have poverty and paved roads. That seems like a great option right now. And Archie, our such a gracious host, he just looks at me and he goes, as we're bouncing all over the place, he goes, man, there's a ton of NGOs scrapping in that space in the city, and some of them are doing amazing work, but most of them are just selfish and corrupt. And most of them are creating dependency, and they're removing dignity. And we go where the most vulnerable are. And guess what? The most vulnerable, they don't have paved roads. And I was like, all right, I didn't expect that answer. So then I shot off another one. I'm like, well, why are we going on this mountain and not that mountain? And he said, oh, that's easy. He said, those leaders over there, those tribal leaders, he said, they're still way too selfish. He said, they're unwilling to do what's best for the community versus what's best for their pockets. And I said, wait, what? You said no to them to go here? Like, what are you talking about? And he went on to share that before they'll ever invite a church to come in to do sponsorship, they work with the local tribal leaders to make sure that those leaders are leading towards positive change in the community, that they're committed to the community's good, not just their own. And actually, he went on to share that they work with them, and he calls the local leaders to identify their biggest problems, and then they come up with the solution. And then sometimes that solution has to have some coaching and training from the staff, but they help the leaders take ownership of their communities. He said oftentimes local leaders will start by saying, our village is so poor, we have no money, and we're all starving to death. And what they want is money. But Archie said that their team will work with them and lead them to realize that they don't have money because they don't have crops, and they don't have healthy crops because the way they're plowing washes all their seed down the hill, and they can't keep plowing because they keep getting sick, and they keep getting sick because they keep drinking dirty water downhill from where they wash their animals and let them use the restroom. And so Archie says, we won't work with the community until the community leader has enough influence in the community to vision them to switch where they bathe their animals, because that's free. Behavioral change is free. And he says if the community wants change bad enough, they'll change for free behavioral change. And once they change for what's free, then they'll start bringing in what's not free. Once they've committed to changing step one, then they bring in step 2 and step 3 and step 4. And so he said, we're going where the real needs are, but also where there's a real willingness to make real change. And then Archie said, I asked him, what do they do with the communities that won't change? And he goes, we just let them watch. We let them watch what happens when there's a community that actually commits to the process, that commits to change, that commits to doing the work, not just looking for handouts. And it was at this moment that I realized that these guys were doing things differently than how I'd seen and differently than what I was thinking. They just weren't throwing food out to people who were hungry. They just weren't looking for people who were looking for a handout. They were developing community leaders and leaders who took ownership of their problems and who taught their people new ways of systematically starting to shift their communities out of poverty. And that's when Archuleta goes on and he looks at me and he goes, I cannot wait to show you the ways that child sponsorship, how we're helping shift families in their thinking and the ways that are changing the foundation that their lives are being built upon. And then he started talking about all the different ways and he took us to schools. And he started talking about how these schools, these kids were normally not able to afford to go to school, but because of child sponsorship, they were now able to go to school. And many of these schools were just 10 sweat boxes with a chalkboard up front. And the kids would sit on their knees and they would use the benches to write on, but these kids were learning to think and to read and to reason for the first time in their family's history. These kids would be able to do things their parents and their grandparents would never have been able to do because they were learning to read. And then we traveled a little bit farther. We went to two different types of cisterns, which were just kind of like these giant boxes of sorts that catch water. And one of these boxes was actually attached to the largest roof in that community, which was a church, and the water would run off the roof and then be caught in that giant box. And then the village, they could walk a mile to that box to get clean, fresh water versus 4 miles to the foot of the mountain to a dirty spring that was getting them sick. We then walked to another cistern, and this cistern was on the side of the mountain, but it was really close to where the spring of the water started. And this was a stack of stones that was covered in cement. And it kept the water clean because it was right at the source. And I asked Archuleta, I was like, why aren't these things all over the country? Why aren't you dropping a well all over the country? And he goes, oh, it's easy to drop a well somewhere. But that doesn't teach people to use it, to value it, to repair it. And he goes on talking about how when you move too quick and you just put in wells, then these people don't know, they think of it as the rich man's well, and that no one actually cares about the rich man's well, and so no one fixes it. And no one's ever taught how to use it. No one's taught to value it. And he said what they do is they go in and they have the elders teach the community the value of clean water. And then the men of the community carry the rocks for the cistern. And then the women of the community come in and mix the mud. And then the kids come in and paint it. And then all of a sudden it's their well, not ours. And sponsorship pays for that teaching, pays for the mud, pays for the paint. And what I love is it pays for the party that's thrown once the well's done. I was starting to see that things were a little bit different than what I had expected on my way up the mountain. See, I wasn't seeing a poor kid having to walk for water anymore. I was starting to see a kid who was empowered to change his family with clean water. Water that was there because you showed up here and you sponsored a kid in that community. We then traveled to churches where families were able to process the trauma and the pain of their life, where they found community support, and where much of the teaching of how to live differently was coming from, where Jesus was found and lives are being changed, not only for today, but for tomorrow. And all of this was happening because of sponsorship. Sponsorship was rallying families to come together to support each other, to strengthen these communities. We also visited so many fields, like so many cornfields. And Archuleta showed us how they were using these triangle things that would help keep the rows on the right part of the mountain so that the seeds wouldn't run off. And he showed us where community leaders were making these greenhouses of sort to be able to send seedlings home with kids to be able to plant at their house. And most importantly, we saw kids after kids carrying baskets of corn out of the fields planted from seeds that your sponsorship provided to be made into dinner for their families back home. To them, this wasn't just another handout that they picked up off the back of a truck. To them, this was a new way of life that because of you, they were getting to experience. We also met this cute little boy. And guys, this kid was cute. Oh, he was cute. And he was so excited to show us his bunnies. Bunnies that will feed his family for years to come. Bunnies that, you guessed it, you provided through sponsorship. And finally, after we felt like we were bouncing all over the mountain, Archuleta drove me to this house. And I got to meet Pearl and my sponsor kid, Emmanuel. And we got to meet his family and his mom and his dad and all of his siblings. And his dad actually took off work just to make sure he didn't miss it when we came. And I remember how insanely rough his mother's hands were when she took mine, and how weak mine felt when she clasped mine. And I remember thinking that we would probably just give this polite, gentle hug. But the next thing I know, this like Amazon woman, she pulls me in and she holds on and she squeezes. And this hug meant something to her. And after we kind of got past the point of awkward, it started to mean something to me. See, I realized in that moment that she didn't know how to say thank you, but she could hug thank you. And she gave a good thank you that day, guys. And I remember feeling so awkward and small and so undeserving of what her eyes and that hug were trying to give. I mean, to Pearl and I, it was just a few bucks a month. It was just this passive commitment. It was just a letter here and a letter there. I mean, Emmanuel, he was just kind of, I hate to say this, just an afterthought. He was just a sponsored kid whose photo lived on our fridge. But to her, he was her kid. And her kid was now getting a shot at education and corn and meat and health care and spiritual care and emotional care and clean water. And her kid, because he was our sponsored kid, was being offered a new life, a life that she didn't think was even possible for him. And I thought the answer to how do we live here, knowing that they live there, and how do we help there without messing it up more? Man, I thought for sure that it was going to take so much more than sponsorship. It was going to take more than just a couple of 20s a month. I thought for sure it would have to like disrupt my life, and it would be hard, and it would change everything about me. And I thought it would just, my huge sacrifice would just make a little dent in theirs. And I was shocked. I was shocked to realize my not a lot was a whole lot to them. I was shocked at the wisdom of a local leader who was working to make sustainable long-term change, how they just didn't feed you for a day, but they wanted to change how your grandkids would be fed one day. And guys, I don't know how to fix the whole world. I don't know how to make sure 100% of the time everything is working perfect. I don't know the answer to all those questions. But what I do know beyond a shadow of a doubt is that Emmanuel's mom doesn't care that I don't know. She just knows that someone cares for her baby. And to her, her baby and her kids and her family, their world's getting rocked. And to them, it means everything. That day, with that hug, made me a believer that our not a lot is a whole lot to them. That it's a lie that our problems are bigger than we can fix and that we can't make a difference. The problems are not bigger than our God. The problems are not stronger than our God. Our God did not tell us to go into the world to simply waste our time in the world. He knows that when he's in it and when we're working together, our not a lot in his hands becomes a whole lot, and we can change a lot of really big problems, and a lot of communities and a lot of lives, and a lot of mothers will now one day be able to hug a stranger on this side of heaven or the next who may never know the difference that their little did in their little one's life. That hug, that day, wrecked me a lot. Hope and change are possible one kid at a time. But that day also wrecked me because after we left Emmanuel's house, we went to the local regional hospital. And I got to use the term regional hospital really loosely here. It was a tent in the middle of the woods. And Archuleta snuck me down to the tent. And he let me peek in. And inside the tent, it was all dirt floors with these canvas cots lined up in 2 rows, and each cot had a hole cut in them with a pan slipped underneath. And I asked him, where's all the medical equipment? Where's the doctors and the nurses and the medicine? And he kind of sort of laughed, and he goes, this is it. It's a cot with a hole. It's what you got. And I said, what do you mean? He says, when you get sick, you walk here. And if you're lucky enough, your family will help you carry you here. But once you're here, they lay you there and you stay there with the pan underneath the hole in your cot until you either recover or you die. That's what we got. No doctors, no medicine. There is no hope outside of a miracle. And often life is just a few cents away with an anti-diarrhea pill, diarrhea that they often get from the dirty water in their villages. And I remember that day so much because it was also that day that as I'm on that country, on that mountainside, I got peeked up to the top and my phone vibrated and I got a text. And that text informed me that my dad, who was also on his own deathbed, dying from a lung disease that was wrecking his life, had just received this incredible word that he had been chosen. He had been chosen for a renewed lease on life, for a new set of lungs. And so my family was rushing from their house to this state-of-the-art hospital for my dad to get a second renewed lease on life. And Pearl was jumping on a plane with a 3-year-old, and I'm crawling out of the mountains of Haiti with dirt and sweat and tears and redirecting my flight to figure out how to join my family. And all the while, I'm trying to make sense of this emotional whiplash that I'm experiencing. I mean, I had Emmanuel and the corn and the water and the diarrhea deathbeds, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, I got like fast food everywhere and clean water on tap, and my dad's sitting in a multi-million-dollar hospital getting a renewed release on life. And I'm sitting there going, I'm glad we received the lungs and the renewed lease on life. I'm very thankful to have my dad, but I was just born here. I didn't choose this. I mean, why have I been given so much when they have so little? I mean, how do I live here in all of this when they live there? And how do I help there without messing it up more? And God, where are you in the world in the middle of all of this mess? When things are so unevenly distributed, seriously, God, where are you? And I remember sitting in this extravagant hospital lobby, dirt underneath my fingernails and behind my ears, just waiting to hear how my dad was doing. So excited for him and my family, and yet battling so much guilt and shame and embarrassment over the extravagance here. And I remember asking God, where are you? Why am I here and not there? I didn't choose this life. I didn't earn this life. I simply was born into this life. And in the middle of all of my questioning of God, where are you? In the middle of this extravagant hospital room, waiting to hear if my dad will get a second renewed on life and waiting to hear if Emmanuel's dad will die from diarrhea, I hear God whisper back, where am I? I'm in you. Where am I? I'm in you. Where am I? I'm in you. Where is God in the midst of a global pandemic and famines and civil wars and sex trafficking and corruption and generational poverty? Where is God in the mess of this world? He's in you. And he's inviting you, and he's inviting me to step out of the 4 little walls of my life and to go into all the world, to fight the inward pull to only care about me and mine and ours and our little world and that we've constructed around ourselves. And he's inviting us to expand our view, to see beyond our walls, to see what we can't see once we've seen it. And yes, there are horrific problems in our world, gigantic issues, but there's also amazing solutions that may not appear like a lot to us, but together, they become a lot, and they can change a whole lot in this world. So, how do we live here? Knowing that's how they live there? How do we help without messing it up more? We remember that God, he's in us. He's inviting us to show up here today to sponsor a kid. So amazing work and love can show up there tomorrow. He's inviting us to show up here and sponsor a kid there so that a child will get a chance to choose life there. He's inviting us to show up here and to sponsor a kid there so that a local leader gets the chance to lead in profound ways to change a community. He's inviting us to show up here and sponsor a kid there so that we can fulfill God's great commandment to go into all the world and to get out of our selfish little holes. When we show up here and sponsor a kid there, we are choosing to live responsibly when the world has so irresponsibly been generous towards us. We must keep showing up here so that people can keep showing up there. We may never be able to go there. We will never take all of us there. But I promise you that what's happening here today is truly changing lives there tomorrow. And in just a minute, you're gonna hear from one of your local leaders about where in the world your campus has been invited to show up. And my prayer is that by us doing our part here today, God does something beyond our wildest dreams there tomorrow. And if you're here and you're not sponsoring a kid, my simple request is please do. And if you're here and you are sponsoring a kid, why not 2? Why not 3? Why not 4? Your literal does a lot there. Because here's why. There is a mother who is waiting to one day give you a hug that might convey just a fraction of how much her life and her kid's life has been changed because you showed up in their life. Let's pray. Jesus, may we be a church. May we be a people who simply does not see and turn our head, who just simply doesn't hear and then ignores, who simply refuse. May we not be a people who refuse to live outside of our boxes, but God, may we be a people who break the walls down of our little world and we see what is happening on the other side of the planet. We see what's happening in the darkest of places. We see and we hear the stories of the most vulnerable kids on the planet. And may we be a people who simply show up, who say, I trust the process to move forward. I trust that if this is what you're doing to make a life change, that we raise our hand and we say, choose me. We want to be a part of it. God, may we be a people who show up here so you can show up there. Jesus, may there be hundreds of mothers waiting to throw huge hugs around our neck because hundreds and hundreds of us show up here today saying, God, if my little can change a lot, then use what I've got. Jesus, we love you. We thank you and we trust you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Well, guys, not only are we about to get a chance to show up and to make a difference in the world, but today, we actually get a really unique opportunity. We get to flip the script, and instead of us choosing a kid, we get to empower a kid to choose us. Today, we simply get to raise our hand and say, hey, I'm willing to make a difference. And so in just a moment, we're gonna watch a video that's gonna explain all of this and how it works, but may so many of us respond right now to raising our hands to be chosen, willing to serve, willing to be used to make a difference, that there is no kid in any village that we've committed to going to waiting for someone. May mothers around the globe have your photo on their homes, longing for the day that they get to see you and they get to hug you and they get to say thank you to you because you showed up today to love them there. Check out this video.
In the heart of downtown Chicago, hundreds gathered who wanted to sponsor a child through World Vision. But unlike so many sponsorship events before, this one was a bit unexpected. Instead of having people choose a kid from a set of photos, like sponsorship's been done for decades, we did something that we've never done before. The choice is theirs. The choice to take hold of their future, to pursue their God-given gifts, to become change makers in their communities, and even the choice to step into a life-changing relationship with you.
That's right, friends. We are flipping the script today. We're taking action so kids across the globe can be sponsored, kids that are waiting just for you. So LCBC Online, you guys sponsor kids from a community in Bolivia. Here in Mannheim, we're opening actually our third community in Kenya because of the thousands of faithful sponsorships over the years. And so that's something we're celebrating. Whether we're currently sponsoring a child today or not, every one of you in here can participate in the Chosen Experience today. So let me be really specific. Like Matt said, if you are somebody who has never sponsored a child before, man, choose to step in the game and give what you've been given. And change a child's destiny, honoring their opportunity to choose you. So here's what to do. You ready? I need you guys to participate. It all starts with a text. So grab your phone. Everybody grab your phone. If you do it, it'll be easier for the person next to you as well. So grab your phone real quick. And if you're at home, text the word LCBC Online to 56170 to start the Chosen process. And if you're here in Mannheim, text Mannheim to 56170. That's right, LCBC Online at home or Mannheim if you're here at our location. In just a moment, you'll get a text back, and it's really important you follow that link and sign up. It's just 5 easy, quick steps, and you're ready to be chosen. So grab your phone, text the number, get a link back. And then now we're about ready to send your picture in. So here's how this goes. If you're at home, upload a photo as it prompts you to do that in that step. And if you're here with us today, we want to help you. We would love to help you out at our photo booth in the atrium. Just select the option as the text comes back from the link and take that QR code, select the option for the QR code, take that out there, and you can take your picture out there. So that's it. Simply text the code, click on the return link, sign up, and then provide your picture. And here's the exciting part. Your name and your photo will be sent to our communities where World Vision staff are already preparing to print out your pictures. In just a few weeks, you'll get a picture of the child that chose you holding your picture. How cool is that? Right? How cool is that? And so if you're at home, watch the mail for that picture to come to you. If you're here this weekend at Mannheim, we're going to present you with a reveal weekend in person on Thanksgiving weekend. So make sure you come on back and join us. So don't wait, friends. Sign up now. Seriously, you can just sit in your seats when we end here in just a moment and make sure you follow through to take action. Because some of these kids, guys, they have been in our atrium year after year, time after time with their picture hanging in display and never been chosen or taken home. But today, you're giving them the honor of flipping the script and choosing you. So you may not be able to change the whole world, but you can change the whole world for one child. So stay right where you are. Take as much time as you need. And LCBC, today as you take action, I want to pray over you that may the Lord bless you and protect you. May he smile on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord show you his favor and give you peace. Thank you so much for being here today. We'll see you next week.